Summer vacation had finally ended. Some of the students actually had wished that summer vacation could last for about another 1 or 2 more weeks. But some of the students actually had long to go back to school. Among them is in fact Starlight Glimmer. This particular summer vacation, she had spent a lot of time with her friends Fluttershy, Rainbow, and Rarity. But she was actually happy to go back to school to finish her studying. But this day will be a little bit different. Everything actually was back to normal. They had the normal class, math, English, chemistry, all like that. But during lunch break, when Starlight was sitting with her best friend Trixie, they noticed another teenager, a young man, sitting by a table by himself. Trixie, do you know who that is? Starlight asked. And Trixie turned around and looked at this young boy, or this young man, but she shook her head and said no, she had no idea who that is. And she actually was confused because normally they know exactly everyone at school, but it turns out later on that like the same day when Starlight had asked Applejack, who usually knows if there are any new students at school, she asked about this particular student. And Applejack confirmed that it is in fact a new student by the name Eclipse Shadow. Eclipse Shadow actually had moved to Cantal City with his mother and his younger sister during summer vacation. So that is the reason why they never actually seen him before at the high school. She asked Applejack if she knows something about him. And no, I don't know much about him. Only that he is well, he doesn't seem to have made any friends at this point. He's a little bit shy of himself, she said. That's actually something that Starlight could rely on. Because when she started at Cantlot High School herself, she was quite shy, and she didn't have any friends. That was until she met Trixie, and later on with friends with Applejack and other among her friends. So that was something that she could actually rely on. And she decided to maybe to ask Eclipse Shadow if maybe he wants to be her friend. So for the next day, she was determined to walk up to the table that he sat the day before and ask if she could sit down. So, but there is another thing. She actually had, she didn't even notice because during math class that day, she noticed that he was sitting in the back in the at almost at the end of the room. She didn't even notice it until that day. She didn't even notice that she actually shared math and English class with Eclipse Shadow. She had no idea because she was mainly focused on her studying and not ready for being just turned around and even not even notice this new student. But she was still determined to walk up to him through lunch break. And she did tell Trixie that she was going to sit down to the same table where Eclipse Shadow, only to make that he would feel more welcome to the high school and perhaps trying to make be friends with him. So, and Trixie, she didn't mind that because she decided to sit down with Applejack and the others. But as she walked up to the table where Eclipse Shadow was sitting, she asked him with a smile and that if it was okay for her to sit down. He actually looked up and was surprised that another student actually talked to him. But he didn't say anything. He just nodded and sit down. At first, he was silent. She tried to break the silence by asking him how he likes the high school so far. He answered a little bit shortly that he actually had a good time. She asked if he had made any friends, but he shook his head. But then she said, well, she wouldn't mind to be his friend if he didn't want that. And afterwards, he actually started to smile a bit, and she explained that she used to be like him when she had entered this high school. She had no friends at all, because most of her friends that she had from her former school had ended up picked up, had ended up enter some other schools. Some had entered to the Crystal Prep Academy, and some others had across other schools across town. So she was the only one from her former school who went to Canterlot High School. So that's something that she could rely on too. Then she told him that she heard that he has a younger sister, and he nodded. And it turns out that his younger sister also went to Canterlot High School, and he actually told her name, and she was surprised because she had noticed that particular girl a few times hanging out with Sweetie Belle, Apple Bloom, and even Scootaloo, sometimes at school and even after school. So she asked him if maybe he wanted to hang out after school, maybe just to, I don't know, something like go to the park or just maybe hang out, just to get to know each other better. He was at first unlikely not very much, he wasn't much of this positive of this idea, but she didn't push him to do that. She said, it is okay if you don't want to hang out today, maybe sometime when you feel ready for it. And he just nodded, and they continued eating their lunch. After school was over, Trixie was waiting for Starlight. She asked her about Eclipse Shadow. Just just random questions like how he's like as a person, what he's like, and Trixie was actually very happy to know more about him, even though that they saw him walking out from school and just walked home. And it turns out that he didn't live that far from school, so he actually just walked by himself. And even though that same afternoon, Starlight actually hung out with Trixie, and they were actually at the park. They were just talking about some of the random things, actually. But the topic about Eclipse Shadow came up randomly. They actually both talked that he seems to be quite nice and a little bit handsome young guy for this age. But even though that they both realized that he might be shy around new people, Patrick said he might get along with other students soon. And sure enough, after this has been 2 weeks after school started, Eclipse Shadow actually had made a few of friends, in fact, like Flash Sentry and his band, Flash Drive, and Sue. He actually wasn't that shy anymore. But he still was, but could be shy around new people, just in case though. But despite that he had a lot of friends, sometimes he actually preferred to be alone. And even though the Starlight herself was wondering, since he had made quite a of friends at high school, why was he prefer to be alone? Well, she wasn't much as to disturb him with his questions. But one day after school, just before Starlight was about to go home, Eclipse Shadow actually walked up to her and asked if she maybe want to hang out. And she was a little bit surprised by the question. But since this was in fact a Friday and they didn't have any school the next day, so she said she's sure. So they decided to go into town just to this Sugar Cube Cafe to have something to eat. Both actually ordered a milkshake. There, they start talking more about themselves. Like Eclipse Shadow explained that he actually had moved to Canton City with his mom and his sister about during this summer after that his father had passed away only about 2 years earlier in a car crash. He he took it very hard because they were very close. They did almost anything together. They played soccer. They, they did almost anything together. Ever since his loss of his parent of his dad, he shut down. He somewhat insulated himself, and that was until when his mom actually had been offered a new position of her job in Kansas City. So she decided to take that opportunity, but that had meant that he has to move to a whole new city. His younger sister, though, she was actually very eager to move from a whole new town, even though that she would have to leave her old friends behind. But she was actually quite open, and she didn't have any much difficulty to make new friends at school, Canton High School. Even though that she was just about 2 years younger than himself. But since he actually still had many good friends back home, but he still maintained contact with them. But despite that, she can actually understand, rely on to how it's like to lose a parent. She explained that she lost her mom when she was about 5 years old in, during the winter flu pandemic that was going on, and she was very fond of her mom. They did almost anything. They baked all the time. They actually went on hikes together in the forest and in nature. After the loss of mother, she lost her. She lost a piece herself also. Since her father had tried to raise her by himself, but she was actually very happy to at least have one supporting parent. Even though that her father always said, "Your mother will always be in your heart. You will always remember that." And this was something that both Eclipse Shadow and Starlight could actually bond over. They had something very common. They had lost a parent, even though that both of them actually lost a parent, and even that their mom or dad had to raise them alone, which were sometimes a difficulty, but they pulled it through. After they had left the cafe, Eclipse Shadow asked if she maybe wanted to come over to his place, and she said yes. They actually walked over to his house, and she was actually surprised how big the house were. Maybe that store 2 floors house, and she asked what kind of job his mother worked as, and he explained that his mother actually worked as a nurse at this local hospital, and she was actually surprised to hearing that. But she then asked and assumed that she works sometimes nights, and he said yes. But he was very capable of doing to take care of his sister meantime, like cooking, cleaning if needed. But there was something that Starlight actually sometimes could rely on to, because sometimes her father works late at his office. So she didn't mind to cook her own food, but she always cooked something for her father to be just warming up in the microwave. At his place, though, they actually played video games and just watched some TV until it was time for Starlight to go home. She said that she had us a great time, and he said to too. But he then asked her something. He was actually stuttering and was quite nervous when he asked her if she maybe wanted to go out with him on a date. She was surprised, but she in fact said yes, and she smiled, and they decided to go on to the movies the next day. And we, when he actually picked her up at her place the next day, she was amazed that he actually had a car. He explained that his car was in fact his dad's former old car, but that he had inherited from him when he was old enough, and that was a car they both had worked on to restore, and it was had just been completely restored by him by himself. She was surprised that this was the last project that Eclipse Shadow ever had on his dad before he passed away. But at the movies though, they had this a great time. They actually should decide to pick an action movie. It is having a great time. Even afterwards, they actually went to a small diner just around the corner where they ordered a burger and some fries. They would just talk about the movie, what they thought about it, like their outputs, their insight on this, what they thought about it was about the bad guy and how the movie could be better, something like that. But they had a good time. He later drove her home, where she gave him a kiss and said that she actually had such an amazing date, and she wished that they could maybe go out on more dates in the future. And he smiled and said, perhaps. It didn't actually take long because by the next week, all their friends were in fact aware that they've been on a date. But they actually asked if they were official dating or just one date. Well, Starlight actually said that he hadn't even asked her out for a second date. But she was very optimistic it will happen. And sure enough, the same Friday that week, he actually picked her up and took her for a park to have a picnic. And up there, he actually asked her officially if she wanted to be his girlfriend, which Starlight said yes. Even though they actually were happy to be with someone they like, they had so much in common. They liked the type of same music, and they had something else that they actually were bonding over: a loss of a parent. But despite that, their relationship between each other actually remained strong. Even when their friends was actually quite happy to see that Starlight had found someone to be with. Even when the school prom was happening, they actually went to the prom as a date. Him in a tux, in a tuxedo, and she in a white dress. It was an magical moment. They danced a lot at the school prom, even though they weren't chosen to be the prom queen or king, but they actually still had a good time there. Even afterwards, though, they were still actually happy. But then, something did happen. During the winter, just after school had closed down for the winter holidays, and just around after New Year's Eve, Eclipse Shadow received a message from Trixie stating that Starlight was in hospital. It turns out that she was in an accident, in a car accident of all. She was in fact in the car with her dad. They were driving when they saw this when they saw a moose running across the street. They thought it was a moose at least, but it turns out to just be a deer. They actually tried to stop from the being impacted there, but the father, instead of to time a break, he tried to steer away from it and impact a tree. But luckily for Starlight, she only had broken arm and a mild concussion. When he heard the words car accident, He had a very terrified mind look. It was almost like he had a heart attack. Because this was the exact thing when he lost his dad years ago. He passed away in a car accident, and he was terrified at hearing that Starlight being in a car accident. He was terrified. He had lost not only his father a few years ago, but now he had lost his girlfriend. If that had happened, he would not have recovered from the loss. But when he later heard that she was just fine, she had a broken arm and mild concussion. She was, even though she'd had some bruises and a broken arm, but he was still happy to see that she was okay, but at the same time terrified. Because he had no idea how he would react if she did have made it. Of course, she explained that she was terrified also, meaning that if she had passed away in an accident, she had no idea how Eclipse Shadow would have even react. But both were happy to at least they that she made it. Even though they made some plans to spend time go out for any doing for dates, since she broke her arm, there was still a lot of things that she could do, go to the movies with him, or but they decided, in fact, to stay at Starlight's home for having a movie night, which turns out to even be a good idea. And even after they both have finished high school, Starlight actually had still worked at the mall. She were in fact working with Sunset Shimmer at this sushi bar. It turns out that Sunset actually had asked Starlight if she needed a work, and she would ask her boss if Starlight come start working there at the place, and he said yes. Well, though that Starlight was working at the sushi bar with Sunset, turns out that that Eclipse Shadow actually started working at a car shop not far from the mall, and he was actually skilled in repairing cars like broken engines like that. And his dream was to be a car mechanic, and he actually worked up to fulfill his childhood dreams. And he still kept his dad's car despite what happened. And just after that, though, after they had been together for 5 years, Eclipse Shadow proposed to Starlight, and she said yes immediately. They actually decided to have a small wedding to their close families and close friends. It's Starlight had actually asked Trixie to be her bridesmaid, and Eclipse Shadow had asked Flash to be his best man. And they actually just had an amazing time at the wedding. Even afterwards, though, they actually went to a small cabin outside town for about a week for their honeymoon. And they just had a great time. But after being married for 2 years, Starlight actually announced they were expecting a baby within the next few months. When Eclipse Shadow's parent mom found out, she was in fact excited. Not only that she now was going to be a grandmother, but they were expecting a daughter. And even for Shadow, Eclipse Shadow, he would not been more excited himself when he was told from Starlight that he is going to be a dad. But just when the daughter was about 3 years old, they found out they were expecting a second baby. a boy. And this was something that shocked and made Eclipse Shadow tearful eyes. She had picked a name for the boy, even had not even had asked Eclipse Shadow about his opinion, but they decided to name the baby after his father. And he couldn't be more proud, and he knows that his father would have loved the name. And all of this actually wouldn't be possible if Starlight hadn't even walked up to Eclipse Shadow all those years ago at the school during lunch break. If she had even asked him to sit down by the table, she may not have even found her true love at all. And Eclipse Shadow, he wouldn't have not had he found his soulmate within Starlight Glimmer. He had no idea what else he would have done if that she had even asked him if she could sit down. But that is something that both were very grateful that she did. And this is how Starlight Glimmer and Eclipse Shadow found a true love, got a big family together. The end.